Good morning and welcome to the University Unitarian Church of Seattle on this summery Sunday in mid-August. I'm Bruce Bode, a retired minister from across the Puget Sound in Port Townsend, where I served as the lead minister for the Quimper Unitarian Universalist Fellowship for 14 years from 2004 to 2018. I checked my records this past week, and I found that I've spoken here at University Unitarian twice before in late May of both 2009 and 2010. So it's been 10 years. It's good to be back, and welcome to you. I do still live in Port Townsend, and earlier this morning, my wife Flossie and I drove here, a beautiful trip across the Coleman Narrows Bridge. And this is my first time to be in your newly renovated sanctuary. Congratulations, even though you yourselves can't be in it at present. Well, there are 6 of us here this morning, in addition to my wife and myself, pianist Dwight Beckmeyer and tenor soloist Ian Loney. And then behind the scenes, the technical team that are live streaming this service for you are Byron Christad and David Owens. And I want to thank them as well as my valued colleague, John Luopa, your senior minister, and staff member Susan St. James for their skill and their care in organizing and preparing this service. Though as a congregation, we cannot be together in person, we will endeavor to be as fully present with you as current circumstances allow. We begin our service with a prelude of Robert Schumann performed by pianist Dwight Beckmeyer. Dwight. Thank you, Dwight. I feel like I'm present at an early morning concert. Gorgeous. The words of our call to celebration this morning, and you should be able to follow them on the screen, are a prayer from the East Indian poet Rabindranath Tagore. These words: "Where the mind is without fear and the head is held high, where knowledge is free, where the world has not been broken up into fragments by narrow domestic walls, where words come out from the depth of truth, where tireless striving stretches its arms towards perfection, where the clear stream of reason has not lost its way into the dreary desert sand of dead habit, where the mind is led forward by thee into ever-widening thought and action, into that heaven of freedom, my Father, let my country awake." And we will now sing the words of our doxology, which again will appear on the screen.
From all that dwell below the skies, let songs of hope and faith arise. Let peace, goodwill on earth be sung through every land, on every tongue.
As we engage this morning's service, let's take a couple of minutes to settle ourselves and go inward. And we'll do this by means of a musical meditation that will be led by our pianist, Dwight Beckmeyer. As we prepare to receive this Sunday's offering, would you please join me in speaking our offering words, which will be followed by the offertory song. Our offertory words are these: "This church is a community of ourselves. Its energy and resources are our energy and resources. Its wealth is what we share. When we contribute to the life of this community, we affirm our lives within it.
Es fällt ein Stern herunter aus seiner Funkeln den Himmel. Das ist der Stern der Liebe, den ich dort fallen seh. Es fallen von Apfelbaume der weißen Blätter so viel. Es kommen die Necken, die Lüfte und treiben damit ihr Spiel. Es kommen die Necken des Lüfte und treiben damit ihr Spiel. Es singt der Schwan im Weiher und rührt auf und ab und immer leiser singend tauscht mit Fluten Grab. Es ist so still und dunkel, verweht ist Blatt und Blut. Der Stern ist knistern stoppen, verklug in das Schwanenlied. Der Stern ist knisternd verstoppen, verklugen das Schwanenlied.
What a treat. Thank you, Ian and Dwight. Well, my sermon message this morning will consist of pieces that I have been gathering over the last couple of months, particularly since the agonizing death of George Floyd on May 25. And an important part of what I have seen and felt happening in our country since that time is an affirmation or reaffirmation of the American dream, the American experiment, or what Unitarian Universalist theologian, the Reverend Dr. Forrest Church, calls the American Creed, which I will be talking about in my sermon. This affirmation or reaffirmation is being led by some of those who have been the most shut out from the American dream through ongoing racial prejudice, but who nonetheless still have seen the dream and are pointing the way to it through anguished, angry, and yet to me ultimately hopeful protests. As a way of introducing my sermon theme, I'm going to read excerpts from two sources of very different backgrounds and experiences, each of which speaks of the American dream by way of protest, that is, by way of calling out our attention to the distance from the dream, calling our attention to the distance from the dream. And I'm going to ask you to kindly pay close attention to these readings, each of which is fairly lengthy. They're really part of my sermon. They're going to take about 8 minutes to read before my sermon, which will be about 20 minutes in length, and with a hymn, We'll Build a Land in between the two. The first reading consists of excerpts from the classic poem, Let America Be America Again. It was written by the black poet Langston Hughes, inspired by a train journey that he took through Depression-struck America in 1935. The poem, written in the non-inclusive gender language of the day, focuses on the idea of the American dream and how for many, attaining freedom, equality, and happiness, which the dream encapsulates, is nigh unto impossible. And yet, the dream might still be fulfilled. Let America be America again. Let it be the dream it used to be. Let it be the pioneer on the plain seeking a home where he himself is free. America never was America to me. Let America be the dream the dreamers dreamed. Let it be that great, strong land of love where never kings connive nor tyrants scheme that any man be crushed by one above. It never was America to me. Oh, let my land be a land where liberty is crowned with no false patriotic wreath, but opportunity is real and life is free. Equality is in the air we breathe. There's never been equality for me nor freedom in this homeland of the free. Say, who are you that mumbles in the dark? And who are you that draws your veil across the stars? I am the poor white, fooled and pushed apart. I am the Negro bearing slavery's scars. I am the red man driven from the land. I am the immigrant clutching the hope I seek and finding only the same old stupid plan of dog eat dog, of mighty crush the weak. Yet I'm the one who dreamt our basic dream to build a homeland of the free. The free? Who said the free? Not me. Surely not me. The millions on relief today, the millions shot down when we strike, the millions who have nothing for our pay. For all the dreams we've dreamed and all the songs we've sung and all the hopes we've held and all the flags we've hung, the millions who have nothing for our pay except the dream that's almost dead today. Oh, let America be America again. The land that never has been yet, and yet must be. The land where every man is free. The land that's mine. The poor man, Indians, Negroes, me, who made America, whose sweat and blood, whose faith and pain, whose hand at the foundry, whose plow in the rain, must bring back our mighty dream again. Oh, yes, I say it plain. America never was America to me. And yet, I swear this oath, America will be. My second reading is a more recent protest, which no doubt most of you have heard about and perhaps read. It's a protest from 2 months ago and from an unlikely source. The Marine General James Mattis, who finally, after the Lafayette Square incident on June 1, broke his silence with respect to the president for whom he has served as Secretary of Defense for 2 years until he resigned in December 2018. What I've got are a couple of paragraphs from his statement in The Atlantic, which came out on June 3. He titled his protest, "In Union, There is Strength," writes General James Mattis. I have watched this week's unfolding events angry and appalled. The words equal justice under law are carved in the pediment of the United States Supreme Court. This is precisely what protesters are rightly demanding. It is a wholesome and unifying demand, one that all of us should be able to get behind. We must not be distracted by a small number of lawbreakers. The protests are defined by tens of thousands of people of conscience who are insisting that we live up to our values as people and our values as a nation. We do not need to militarize our response to protests. We need to unite around a common purpose. And it starts by guaranteeing that all of us are equal before the law. Instructions given by the military departments to our troops before the Normandy invasion reminded soldiers that the Nazi slogan for destroying us was divide and conquer. Our American answer is, in union there is strength. We must summon that unity to surmount this crisis, confident that we are better than our politics. Donald Trump is the first president in my lifetime who does not try to unite the American people, does not even pretend to try. Instead, he tries to divide us. We are witnessing the consequences of 3 years of this deliberate effort. We are witnessing the consequences of 3 years without mature leadership. We can unite without him, drawing on the strengths inherent in our civil society. This will not be easy, as the past few days have shown, but we owe it to our fellow citizens, to past generations that bled to defend our promise, and to our children. We can come through this trying time stronger, and with a renewed sense of purpose and respect for one another. The pandemic has shown us that it is not only our troops who are willing to offer the ultimate sacrifice for the safety of our community. Americans in hospitals, grocery stores, post offices, and elsewhere have put their lives on the line in order to serve their fellow citizens and their country. We know that we are better than the abuse of executive authority that we witnessed in Lafayette Square. We must reject and hold accountable those in office who would make a mockery of our Constitution. At the same time, we must remember Lincoln's better angels and listen to them as we work to unite. Only by adopting a new path, which means, in truth, returning to the original path of our founding ideals, will we again be a country admired and respected at home and abroad. This from General James Mattis, June 3. Our first of 2 hymns this morning is We'll Build a Land, the words of which will appear on the screen.
We'll build a land where we bind up the broken. We'll build a land where the captives go free, where the oil of gladness dissolves the morning. Oh, we'll build a promised land can be. Come, build a land where sisters and brothers, anointed by God, may then create peace, where justice shall roll down like waters, and peace like an ever-flowing stream. We'll build a land where we bring the good tidings all the afflicted and all those who mourn, and will give them garlands instead of ashes. Oh, we'll build a land where peace is born. Come build a land where sisters and brothers, anointed by God, may then create peace, where justice shall roll down like waters, and peace like an ever-flowing stream. We'll be a land building up ancient cities, raising up devastations from old, restoring ruins of generations. Oh, we'll build a land of people so bold. Come build a land where sisters and brothers, anointed by God, may they create peace, where justice shall roll down like waters, and peace like an ever-flowing sea. Come build a land where the mantles of praises resound from the spirit once faint and once weak, where like oaks of righteousness scatter people. Oh, come build the land, my people we seek. Come build a land where sisters and brothers, anointed by God, may then create peace, where justice shall roll down like waters, and peace like an ever-flowing sea.
The American Creed. It's a phrase and concept that was introduced to me by a ministerial colleague, the Reverend Dr. Forrest Church, in a little book that he authored titled The American Creed, A Spiritual and Patriotic Primer. Forrest Church, who died of esophageal cancer in the fall of 2009 at the age of 61, was the son of Idaho Senator Frank Church, who, as some of you may recall, put himself forward as a Democratic nominee for president in 1976 before withdrawing in favor of Jimmy Carter. And Forrest, who worked on his father's campaign, debated with himself whether to go into politics, as he was invited to do, or to go into organized religion, choosing ultimately organized religion and serving then for nearly 30 years as a senior minister of the All Souls Unitarian Church in New York City. During his life, Forrest was also our most prominent Unitarian Universalist theologian. He was the author or co-author of over 20 books, and one of his best, in my judgment, is this little book I mentioned, The American Creed, which was published in 2002 in the aftermath of the searing experience of 9/11, the All Souls Unitarian Church in New York City being very close to ground zero. What is it, Forrest asked, following that horror in his city? What is it that binds us together as a people? The answer he gave was embodied in what he called the American Creed. Now, it's somewhat ironical that a minister for a religious organization like ours, which prides itself in being non-creedal, should speak of the American Creed. But here is his argument for doing so. Creed, he says, sounds forbidding and ecclesiastical. The American Creed is neither, but it is monumental. Creeds, he writes, have to be monumental, struck in metal, that when refined in the furnace of history and burnished by developing thought, can endure the trials of time. They have to be steadfast enough to redeem history itself, reawakening tired minds, rekindling passion in hearts grown weary. Creeds, Forrest says, are spiritual touchstones. They are finished in fire, yet cool to the touch when passed from hand to hand, one generation to the next. So, what is the American Creed? Writes Forrest Church, capturing the essence of the American experiment, the American Creed affirms those truths our founders held self-evident. Justice for all, because we're all created equal, and liberty for all, because we are all endowed by the Creator with certain unalienable rights. America's fidelity to this creed, Forrest says, is judged by history. Living up to it remains a constant challenge. But it invests our nation with spiritual purpose if we honor its precepts, a moral destiny. Now, as indicated in this quote I just read, the spiritual and moral vision of America, our primary creed, as Forrest puts it, is succinctly summarized in the preamble to the Declaration of Independence. And there's another clear statement of it that is found in Thomas Jefferson's first inaugural address, which was given in 1801. The irony, of course, is that both of these statements of the American Creed were penned by a man who was completely enmeshed in America's original sin of slavery, the stain of which we are currently so acutely aware of. And yet, here's a second clear statement of the American Creed from a flawed human being, a man blind perhaps, or unable, unwilling to live out an essential part of that creed. But this from Jefferson's first inaugural address: equal and exact justice to all, of whatever state or persuasion, religious or political, peace, commerce, and honest friendship with all nations, entangling alliances with none, freedom of religion, freedom of the press, and freedom of person. These principles form, says Jefferson, the bright constellation which has gone before us and guided our steps through an age of revolution and reformation. The wisdom of our sages and the blood of our heroes have been devoted to their attainment. They should be the creed of our political faith, the text of civil instruction, the touchstone by which to try the services of those we trust. And should we wander from them in moments of error or alarm, let us hasten to retrace our steps and regain the road which alone leads to peace, liberty, and safety. Now, when Forrest Church wrote the American Creed in 2002 following 9/11, we were at an inflection point in our country, an inflection point relating to whether we were a nation committed to a larger moral and spiritual vision beyond simply self-preservation and self-interest. Were we one among many nations, or did we have to be number one? As it seems to me and many others, we are failing to live up to that larger moral vision at an accelerating pace. And now it would seem we are at another inflection point in our nation, not so much now related to equality among the nations, but now of equality and justice within our nation rather than racial dominance. English author G.K. Chesterton once said that America is the only nation in the world that is founded on a creed set forth, he said, with theological lucidity in the Declaration of Independence. America, he says, is a nation with the soul of a church, which is to say that at the center of our nation there has been a moral idea and ideal that has constituted our nation's soul and which has been an inspiration for many other nations. And now, again, in our time, there is a desperate, desperate struggle for the soul of our nation. What is the soul of our nation? Do we have a moral vision? Are we, as retired U.S. Marine Corps four-star General John Allen put it some weeks ago, are we at the beginning of the end of the American experiment? Or is this a time, through the ongoing protests coming from so many quarters, in which we are being called back to our moral vision, to reaffirm our American creed, to deepen our understanding of it, and to fulfill as never before its mandate and calling? Now, part of what is bringing this American soul struggle forward at this time is, as General James Mattis has written, the vacuum of leadership at the top, in that we have a president who, from where I stand, has no feel for our nation's soul and who does not share the moral vision of the American creed, who to me, quite simply, is rendered incapable of having a moral vision because of personal psychological deficits, everything being self-referential, sadly, dangerously, as by now should be abundantly clear. Our president is not a normal person, and we should not expect him to act normally, as he lacks the human faculty of empathy. Until and unless there is some kind of breakthrough, he cannot feel the pain of others. Only the hole in his own soul that would be loved. And thus, like the scorpion in the animal fable of the scorpion and the frog, he must sting, he must lash out, he must insult and blame others, he must seek revenge, he must go low, he cannot help himself given his current psychic reality. And thus he is opportunistically willing to play to Christian nationalists who have a very different interpretation of the American creed, believing that Christianity should hold a privileged place in America's public square, and who have thus struck a bargain with Donald Trump, in which they are willing to overlook his personal psychological deficits and moral shortcomings in order to obtain their ends. This willingness by Donald Trump to play to Christian nationalists out of personal psychological need was most nakedly on display on June the 1st, when the president crossed Lafayette Square from the White House to awkwardly hold up a Bible in front of St. John's Episcopal Church. A little over 2 months ago, on June 19th, Freedom Day, marches were held across the country commemorating the end of slavery and the Emancipation Proclamation. It was also on this day in 1964 that the Civil Rights Act was passed in Congress after a long battle in the Senate. 13 days later, President Lyndon Johnson signed the act into law, affirming, as he did, the American creed with the following words: "We believe all men are entitled to the blessings of liberty. Yet millions are being deprived of those blessings because of the color of their skin. The reasons are deeply embedded in history and tradition and the nature of man. We can understand without rancor or hatred how this happened, but it cannot continue. Our Constitution forbids it. The principles of our freedom forbid it. Morality forbids it. And now the law forbids it." As indicated in this 1964 Civil Rights Act, the reaffirmation of our American creed also involves a deepening understanding of what that creed means. And you may have noted in that quotation that I read from President Lyndon Johnson, the lack of gender-inclusive language, which speaks to another deepening of our understanding, which was yet to come. In regard to this deepening and enlarging of our understanding of the American creed, there are some poetic lines from the 19th century American poet James Russell Lowell that come to my mind when he says, "New occasions teach new duties. Time makes ancient good uncouth. They must upward still and onward who would keep abreast of truth." Time makes ancient good uncouth. New occasions teach new duties. We are currently struggling with this question of new duties in multiple ways. For example, which commemorative statues to keep in place and which to remove. To what extent do the shortcomings and blind spots of our forebears, as viewed by us in hindsight and with the passage of time, to what extent are the ideals and principles they brought forward overshadowed by their failure to more fully live them out? For the past couple of months, I've been receiving a daily blog news summary by Heather Cox Richardson. She's an American historian, a professor of history at Boston College. I highly recommend her daily news summaries to you. If you're interested, let me know. I'll send you the link. Bill Moyers recently interviewed her. But I'm bringing her name forward today because I want to read a portion of her blog from July 4, which relates to this question of honoring the founders of our republic. Here's what Dr. Richardson says. On July 4, 1776, the Second Continental Congress adopted the Declaration of Independence, declaring, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." For all the fact that the congressman got around the sticky little problem of black and Indian slavery by defining men as white men, and for all that it never crossed their mind that women might also have rights, the Declaration of Independence was an astonishingly radical document. In a world that had been dominated by a small class of rich men for so long that most people simply accepted that they should forever be tied to their status at birth, a group of upstart legislators on the edge of a wilderness continent declared that no man was born better than any other. America was founded on the radical idea that all men are created equal. In this blog, Dr. Richardson goes on to indicate that we are now once again struggling with this founding principle of equality as, quote, "A few wealthy men seek to reshape America into a nation in which certain people are better than others." All men are created equal. The first principle of our Unitarian Universalist Association restates and enlarges this first self-evident principle of the American Creed by affirming and promoting the inherent worth and dignity of every person. And so let me conclude my sermon today with the following idea, namely this, that the religious association of which we are a part is a quintessentially American religion. And this is because the principles, values, and ideals that we hold dear in our religious association are also core principles, values, and ideals of our American democracy. The triple values of religious liberty, religious toleration, and religious pluralism, as well as the following principles, values, and ideals which, as an association of congregations, we have covenanted to affirm and promote: justice, equity, and compassion in human relations, the right of conscience and the use of democratic processes, and the goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. Both our Unitarian and our Universalist forebears were at the forefront in bringing forward these core principles, values, and ideals that constitute our American experiment, our American dream, our American creed. And thus I would contend that we are, or we ought to be, at the forefront again in this time when these core principles, values, and ideals of our American experiment are under threat and in peril. In our tradition, we have a saying: revelation is not sealed. Revelation is not sealed. That is, our understanding of truth is not final and fixed, but evolutionary, unfolding over time. Following this notion, we should be at the forefront in interpreting and reinterpreting the American creed for our time. In this regard, a few weeks ago, I received an email from Roger Anderson. You don't know him. He's a member of the Quimper Unitarian Universalist Fellowship in Port Townsend. But in this email, he gives voice to his thoughts related to Independence Day, and I want to conclude my sermon by reading what he wrote. Dear friends, the 4th of July has long held a special place in my heart. I suspect the spectacle alone was enough to get my attention as a child. But soon I began to appreciate that something special had happened in 1776. The world really did start to change. On July 4 each year, we usually pause long enough to recall the familiar language that we are all created equal and have unalienable rights, including life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. White males like me have usually stopped there, complacent and self-righteous, proud to be Americans. But this year, all of us are challenged to figure out how to respond to overlapping crises that have disproportionately fallen on Americans of color: police killings, COVID-19 deaths, and unemployment. These effects have many causes, but a central factor is how our society is structured. The Declaration itself offers guidance for how to proceed. Among these other self-evident truths, it notes that, quote, whenever any form of government becomes destructive of securing these unalienable rights, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness, end quote. Roger Anderson continues, for nearly 250 years, we have been able to avoid abolishing our government. Instead, we restructure our flawed democracy to meet new understandings of how governments ought to relate to citizens. Awakened by nationwide calls for change, we now have both the opportunity and the duty to build on those uneven experiences. We must be willing to honor our founding principles by again reorganizing our governments at all levels to better ensure those fundamental rights. We are yet again called by Lincoln to dedicate ourselves to bringing to our country a new birth of freedom. So may it be. The words of our closing hymn the hymn is titled, I Know I Can. It's number 1015 in the teal-colored hymnal. But the words were written by a ministerial colleague of mine, the Reverend Dennis Hamilton, now retired, who provided me a little backstory on the creation of this hymn. Originally, he said he had written the words to go with another tune, but they couldn't get the written okay from the composer. And with the deadline for the new hymnal upon them, he worked all night over the phone with composer Jeannie Gagne to make the deadline. He said, Jeannie and I collaborated on an emotionally similar but totally different song. I wrote the lyrics, she provided the music, it was done on the phone. I stayed up all night to meet the deadline. Funny how deadlines work. Now, I don't know if you're familiar with the hymn. It's become one of my favorites. I know I can. The words will appear on the screen.
Though days be dark with storms and burdens weigh my heart, though troubles wait at every turn, I know I can go on when sorrow heals my soul and burden make me strong. Though troubles wait at every turn, I know I can go on. My sister in my heart, my brother in my song. Though troubles wait at every turn, I know I can go on. And though the journey is long, the destination is clear. Though troubles wait at every turn, I know I can go on. So brothers, take my hand, and sisters, take my song. When hope awaits at every turn, I know I can go on.
It's been wonderful to be with you this morning, and again, I want to thank our little crew of musicians and technicians for their labor and love in putting this service together. For our closing words of benediction, I've chosen two quotations. The first is from Rabbi Tarfon from the 1st and 2nd centuries of our Common Era, drawing on the words of the prophet Micah. Do not be daunted by the enormity of the world's grief. Do justly now, love mercy now, walk humbly now. You are not obligated to complete the work, but neither are you free to abandon it. And the second benediction is from an individual who certainly did not abandon the work. It's the final words of Representative John Lewis, written as a short essay titled, "Together You Can Redeem the Soul of This Nation." It was sent to the New York Times 2 days before he died with the request that it be published on the day of his funeral, which proved to be July 30. Democracy, he wrote in that article, is not a state, it is an act. And each generation must do its part to help build what we call the beloved community, a nation and world society at peace with itself. Ordinary people with extraordinary vision can redeem the soul of America by getting into what I call good trouble, necessary trouble. Though I may not be here with you, I urge you to answer the highest calling of your heart and stand up for what you truly believe. In my life, I have done all I can to demonstrate that the way of peace, the way of love, and nonviolence is the more excellent way. Now, it is your turn to let freedom ring.